I want to talk about something that sounds almost counterintuitive. Caring about other people, genuinely, actively caring, might be one of the best things you can do for your own mental health. Not because it makes you a good person, not because of karma or whatever, but because I think a huge amount of the mental suffering people experience nowadays, the anxiety, the emptiness, the constant low level dissatisfaction, comes from one specific thing: too much focus on yourself. And before you click off, I'm not saying that to be harsh. I've been there. I still go there sometimes. This is as much about me as it is about anything else. Let me start with something most people can relate to. You're at a party, or a work meeting, or just having a conversation with someone you don't know very well. And instead of actually listening to what they're saying, your brain is running this constant background commentary. Do I sound weird right now? Is my voice too loud? Did that joke land? Why did I say that? What are they thinking about me? Am I being too awkward? I'm being awkward, aren't I? And the more you try to monitor yourself, the worse it gets. You become stiffer, less natural. You start stumbling over words you would normally say fine. And then you notice that, and it makes everything worse. I know this feeling intimately. I had social anxiety through most of my teenage years and into college. And the frustrating thing about it is that the more you try to fix it in the moment, the more you try to appear normal, calm, and confident, the more it spirals. Because you're adding another layer of self-monitoring on top of the one that's already making you anxious. It's like trying to fall asleep by thinking really hard about falling asleep. The effort itself is the problem. The spiral is the core mechanism of social anxiety, and the interesting thing is, the solution isn't what most people think it is. It's not about building more confidence. It's not about loving yourself more or challenging your negative thoughts. Those things have their own place, but they don't touch the actual mechanism. The mechanism is where your attention is pointed, and it's pointed at yourself. The moment you genuinely shift your focus to the other person, what are they actually saying? What do they actually mean? What's going on with them today? Something changes. The self-monitoring quiets down, not because you fixed it, but because you stopped feeding it. You can't be genuinely curious about another person and simultaneously be trapped inside your own head. There simply isn't enough bandwidth for both. I didn't read this in a book and decide to try it. I just noticed it happening. In moments where I was genuinely interested in someone, where I actually wanted to understand what they're saying, the anxiety just wasn't there. It wasn't that I had overcome it. It was more like I had walked into a different room and left it behind. And that observation sat with me for a long time before I started connecting it to something bigger. Because I think the same principle, when applied at a much larger scale, explains a lot about why so many people feel the way they do today. We live in a culture that is completely obsessed with the self. And I get it. A lot of that comes from a good place. Know yourself, take care of yourself, set boundaries, prioritize your mental health, work on your inner child, understand your attachment style. That stuff matters, and I'm not dismissing any of it, but somewhere along the way, I think it tipped into something else, where everything became about optimizing your own experience, your own happiness, your own growth, your own healing, your own journey. And the more people focused inward, the worse a lot of them seemed to feel. Which actually makes sense when you think about it, because your own mind, when you spend too much time inside it, is not always a pleasant place to be. Especially if you're already struggling. The more you examine your anxiety, the bigger it gets. The more you analyze your unhappiness, the more solid it becomes. The more you interrogate your thoughts, the more thoughts there are to interrogate. There's a point where self-reflection stops being useful and becomes the problem itself, where you're not gaining insight anymore, you're just circling, going over the same ground again and again without getting anywhere new. And what breaks that loop, in my experience at least, isn't more self-work. It's getting genuinely absorbed in something outside yourself. I saw this most clearly working as a physiotherapist. There were days when I came into work carrying a lot, my own stress, my own exhaustion, my own worries about things going on in my life. And on those days when I stayed stuck in my own head, running through my problems between sessions, half present with patients, I felt terrible, drained before the day was even half over. But then there were sessions where something shifted. A patient would start telling me about their situation, not just their physical symptoms, but what was actually going on in their life. And I would find myself genuinely absorbed, genuinely trying to understand what they needed and how to help them, thinking about their problem instead of mine. And in those moments, my own stuff just disappeared. Not because I had solved anything, not because my situation had changed, just because there was no room for it anymore. My attention was somewhere else entirely. I would come out of those sessions feeling lighter than when I went in, which is strange when you think about it. I just spent 15 minutes completely focused on someone else's problems, but somehow that left me feeling better than 15 minutes of being focused on my own. That's not a coincidence. That's just how attention works. There's real science behind this too. When you help someone, genuinely help them, not for recognition or approval, just because they need it, your brain releases dopamine and oxytocin, the chemicals associated with pleasure, reward, and connection. It's not a metaphor. Your brain is literally rewarding you for caring about someone else. And there's consistent research showing that people who orient their lives around meaning, around contributing to others, being part of something beyond themselves, report higher well-being than people who orient their lives purely around personal happiness. Which sounds backwards, right? You would think that chasing happiness would make you happier, but it often doesn't work that way. Meaning does, though. And meaning almost always involves other people. There's also something interesting about what psychologists call rumination. That cycle of repetitive, self-focused thinking that characterizes a lot of anxiety and depression. Going over the same worries, the same regrets, the same fears over and over. And one of the things that most reliably interrupts rumination isn't trying to think more positively. It's genuine engagement with something external, something that actually requires your attention and care. Other people are very good at this because people are interesting and complicated and their problems are real. And when you're genuinely trying to help someone, you don't have much mental space left over for your own spiral. Now, I want to be careful here because I think this can be misread. I'm not saying ignore your own needs. I'm not saying sacrifice yourself for everyone around you until you have nothing left. That's not altruism. That's just a different kind of dysfunction. And it tends to breed resentment more than anything else. I'm also not saying that depression or anxiety is just a selfishness problem. That would be reductive and genuinely harmful. Mental health is complicated. There are people who need professional support and medication and time, and that's completely valid. I'm a physiotherapist, not a psychologist, and I want to be clear about the limits of what I'm talking about. What I'm saying is more specific. There's a particular kind of suffering, the kind that comes from being too trapped inside your own head, too caught in self monitoring, too focused on your own experience, that doesn't respond well to more inward focus. Giving it more attention doesn't shrink it, it grows. And for that specific kind of suffering, genuine connection with and genuine care for other people is one of the most effective things I personally found, not as a cure, just as a way out of the loop. The practical version of this doesn't have to be grand or dramatic. It doesn't mean you need to volunteer every weekend or dedicate your life to service. It can be much smaller than that. It can just be actually paying attention to the person in front of you, not half listening while composing your response in your head, not monitoring how you're coming across. Just being curious, genuinely curious about them. What are they going through? What do they actually mean? What's underneath what they're saying? It sounds simple, right? And it is simple. But it's surprisingly hard to do consistently when your default mode is self-monitoring. When you've spent years with your attention pointed inward, it doesn't just switch off because you decided to focus outward. And I think it takes practice. Small moments repeated over time. But I think the more you practice it, the more natural it becomes. And somewhere in that process, something quietly shifts. Not just in how you relate to other people, in how you feel in general. Because here's the quiet irony. At the center of all this, the less you think about yourself, the better you tend to feel about yourself. The more you get absorbed in other people's lives and problems and stories, the less your own problems feel like the entire universe. The more you genuinely care about what happens to other people, the more connected and grounded and alive you feel. And that loosening, that release of the grip your own head has on you, is one of the most underrated feelings there is. It's not happiness exactly. It's more like relief. Like you've been holding your breath for a long time and finally remembered to exhale. So yeah, care about other people, not because it makes you virtuous, not because the world needs more kindness, though it probably does, but because it gives you a break from yourself. And sometimes, honestly, that's the most useful thing you can do for your own mental health.